Well, I appreciate you being able to join us, Mr. Kelly. How's the weather in Canada?
Uh, Winter has just ended, I hope, and all the snow is finally melted.
Which is always a good thing. Absolutely.
And Toronto is close to that snow belt. So if you went to Buffalo, about an hour away, you might get 3 feet. And here in Toronto, you wouldn't get anything.
That's absolutely crazy. It's a little like places in Montana at times.
Yeah.
When you look back, well, how'd you end up in Canada?
Pardon me?
How'd you end up in Toronto?
How did I get here? Well, uh, my wife and I needed to leave Bozeman, even though I had a wonderful job at the university, which I'd always wanted to go back and be a teacher in the department I graduated. And Rochester Institute of Technology was known for still photography, and virtually all the great photo teachers either went there or studied or taught there. So RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, was building an entirely new campus south of town using the foremost architect in the United States. And so we had a U-Haul coming from Bozeman, and I had a large oak desk, roll-top desk, and we couldn't get it in the apartment that we had assigned to us. So that object I took over to the building, which was just about to be finished, and I found out where my office was, and my roll-top desk was the first piece of furniture in the entire 9-acre complex.
Wow.
So we were there a very brief time because their desire for motion pictures, because they didn't have anybody full time, was basically overrun by the stills people. They took the space that should have been. Film people like to be on the first floor to offload equipment and sets and so forth. We were on the top floor, right underneath the air conditioners, which sounded like being right under a jet plane. So their desire to become a motion picture as well as still photography. And about that time, a guy who had just gone to Toronto had left the faculty there in Rochester. I met him, and he said, well, we're building a new thing in Toronto, and there's lots of money, and it's going to be a huge motion picture building. And so I went with it, and in Montana, I'd reached kind of the limits of what I could do. Jack Stonell and I both made films as part of the faculty, but in Toronto, there was a chance to do feature films and, more. So I accepted. And that was in 1969 that we came over. And I retired there in 1997. And that's the end of that story in a way.
So you
But I've
did
had the opportunity here in Toronto to do a number of things that I could never have done in Montana. The number of films that I've been able to make, real stars to photograph as either director of photography or second unit photographer. So I have always looked back on my time in Montana as almost ideal, and especially growing up there in the 50s. When I look at from today's vantage, I find it some of the best years that one could have. There wasn't all the turmoil there is today.
Mm-hmm. So let's
and
go.
I loved all the people there. And
What
I don't know,
what movies would we know that you were worked on?
I'm still having trouble hearing you.
I'm sorry. What movies that you worked on would we know?
A little louder, Mr. Walker.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kelly. What movies would we might know that you've worked on in the past?
What films?
Yes, sir.
Well, let me just put it this way. I worked on a number of films which include the likes of Peter O'Toole, Rita Moreno, Madeline Kahn, Christopher Plummer, I became friends with Geraldine Chaplin when she came to the U.S. to the night that Hollywood invited Charlie back to Hollywood for the first time since he'd been run out. And for some reason, she came to be the Canadian equivalent, that is, be on the stage here with closed circuit or with circuit to Hollywood. Well, she earlier had been interviewed by me, and I only got the job of interviewing people because they came to Ryerson because their person showing them around town would take them to the best film school. And so we were asked by the jazz radio station to come over and interview people. And the first person I interviewed was Otto Preminger, who was a difficult man to interview, but I got along fine with him. And the second person was Geraldine. And I knew by that time that these stars went to the hotel after they were done doing whatever they were doing, and they'd often just stay in their room. They didn't want to get out and be noticed, run around. So I dropped by the hotel and left off a message that we lived about 3 blocks to the north, and would she be interested to coming to my house and having a drink with Mary and I. Well, I didn't hear from her. The next thing I know, I get a card from Europe saying, well, what are you going to come visit us over here? And what are you doing? She knew I was a filmmaker on the side. So I said, well, I'm making this film with my grandparents in Townsend. It's an hour film, and it's a documentary that is not dressed up to be a real documentary, but a letter from a father to the children about the grandparents. So she said, well, send me a write-up on it. So I sent her about a page and a half write-up on the film, not expecting anything more, really. And one Saturday, I'm working here in my office, and the phone rings, which is unusual at that time of day. And she says, is this Jim Kelly, the filmmaker? I said, yeah. You know, we used to get a lot of those calls they wanted money or something. I said, yeah. And she says, well, this is Geraldine. I said, oh, bullshit. I said, somebody I know is, very few knew about my relationship with her, but I said, somebody's playing a joke on me. And she says, no, I'm down here at the hotel. Why don't you and your wife come down? And so we did. We spent the afternoon talking with her. And why I bring this up, not so much because of that, but her mother, as you may know, was the daughter of Eugene O'Neill, the American playwright. And her mother had grown up with all sorts of fancy people and so forth. Well, she said, Geraldine said, I gave your write-up to my mom. And she read it, and she was absolutely taken by it. And she has a basket by the bed, and she puts things in it that she wants to reread. So she reread on my grandparents in Townsend.
Oh, wow.
And so we laughed. And I said, my God, the most famous name in the world is now present with the least famous in the world. You couldn't go 35 miles from Townsend and get anybody who knew my grandparents. So,
oh, wow.
That's why I tell this story. It's amazing how little stories from a place like Montana are of interest to people. And I spent a lot of time in New York City because of making films. And a number of people I met were quite interested in me, at least to talk to for a while. And of course, basketball never came up. Had only to do with Montana and what was life out there and what are you doing here. So anyhow, I've had a very lucky life. One other thing I'll tell you about my luck, we were finally able to have enough money to buy a house here in Toronto. And this would have been in 1970s. So we had a short time to get it, and the best we could find was this one that it was an estate sale, and the owner, the mother, had lived there since it was built in 1935. And the real estate, she died, and the real estate was one of her family. So we're sitting in the living room, and I said, well, tell me about the Philpotts, these people. And I knew I had Canadian relatives, but I never heard that name. So I said, well, the Philpotts went here and they went there, and they had this relative and that relative. I said, wait a second, who? And he mentioned a name, and I said, I'm related to them.
Oh, wow.
I am related to these people. Furthermore, we live on the river, Humber River, and when my folks came from Ireland, they settled on the river just north of Toronto as it now exists. The airport built around their little cemetery, and I can go up and see my relatives.
Mm.
And my grandparents never knew any. My grandparents in Montana never knew a thing about this.
Wow.
So it's just my life is played like that. So I got to make films in my last year in Montana because of the Sage Advertising in Helena, and Bob Hinkle, for some reason, gave me a job to do. And so I made a number of films for the Sage Advertising, and they won national awards, even international awards. Best travel film of the year, blah, blah, blah. And in those, I would direct, edit, and shoot. And so anyhow, in addition to being lucky to play against guys like Baylor, I had all this wonderful experience in Montana. And in many respects, I regret leaving, but I never would have had the wonderful experiences I've had in Toronto, even though a lot of them were very, very stressful. Making a film, every minute you waste, somebody's got to pay for.
Right.
And any mistake you made hangs around your neck. So, you got enough of that?
That's great. Let's go back to your Montana days. Did you grow up in White Sulphur or Helena or both?
I actually grew up in Denver.
Oh, okay.
My father was from back east, Washington, D.C., and he loved the West. My mother was from Townsend, who grew up there and loved the East. And they met in Denver, appropriately, where East meets West. And I was born there. And by now, we're talking about nearing the start of World War II. And my father joined the military. So we started traveling. So I've lived in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and LA. Then we moved to Chicago and Kansas City. And from there, because Father was going overseas now, I spent a year with my grandparents in Townsend. The war was over, and my father was at Georgetown. His favorite buddy was from Helena, and I don't know if you know the Power Block there in Helena.
Yep.
The big building on the corner of 6th and Last Chance Gulch. Anyhow, T.C. Power was a very wealthy man who got his money selling stuff up at Fort Benton. And he even owned a ferry steamboat that he called the Benton. And so his son was called Benton. And my father had a choice of going to Chicago with a Navy buddy whose father owned one of the biggest law firms in Chicago. But he wanted to move to Montana. So he looked up Benton, and he asked Benton, what is the least civilized town in Montana? Townsend is too civilized. And Benton said, White Sulphur. And so, well, my father, knowing there were like 8 bars, one for every 100 people, and so forth, he moved to White Sulphur. And I was in the class with Paul and others. Ivan Doig, by the way, was a class or 2 behind us, but I knew him quite well. And I played my first basketball, I think, in White Sulphur, in the gym there, which still existed. And we just had a grade team, intramural kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, all I remember is we beat our seniors 93-5 or something.
Oh, wow.
So when we left White Sulphur after 5 years, because my father the lawyer, had a real opportunity with the start of the Atomic Energy Commission going up in Idaho Falls. And so he took me to Idaho Falls, And in junior high, I started playing there. And what I'd found out, no matter where I lived, that I was good enough to play basketball. And because I was tall enough and good enough, I would be on the first team. So I overcame a lot of resistance to being a new kid on the block. So in Idaho Falls, I was on the first team of the JVs. And the varsity team that year, which would have been my freshman year, won the state tournament there. And we moved back to Helena. My folks got a divorce. We moved to Helena, and I started playing for Lloyd Score.
Oh, wow.
And I remember the first time, and everybody heard about this tall kid that they imported. So that this was the year after Ray Howard's team had won the state championship. So the people around had heard about this import. So and we had an apartment right across the street from the high school. So I went over to school the first day, found my locker and was going to it. And Lloyd Score came up to me and he says, "Let me look at your hands." I said, "Okay." And I have small hands. And he kind of looked at him a bit, turned around, and walked away. And so that was my introduction to the coach. And, of course, I was good enough to get on Rush Sheriff's team and was sixth or seventh man, but at least I got to play. And, of course, the following year, I became the center of the team, and we won the state championship for a third time. And so at this time, when we won the state championship, I wanted to go to Bozeman because I would have been the third generation. My grandfather went there, and my mother, she was a member at the time of the Golden Bobcats. She knew Brick and all the people on the team. And so anyhow, Dobby Lambert had just recently been made coach, and he and the football coach, Wally Lim, who you may not remember, was the football coach, but then left to go coach professionally on some Houston or Texas team, big time. Anyhow, thanks to Dobby Lambert, he wanted, especially in view of the field house being built that he knew about, he wanted to get out of the old Rocky Mountain Conference and expand who we played. And he wasn't afraid to play the best. So thanks to him, he kept signing up everybody that would play us. And he even, I'll jump to, when you dressed in Romney, you came up from the the second floor. In other words, to get to the court, you went up to the third floor. The coaches were on the second floor, and so were the dressing rooms and shower. So, as a brand new person there, waiting to see the team come out for the game, I happened to sit by the stairs coming up from the second floor, and they all came running up and onto the court, and they all had capes that went over their shoulders and down to around their legs. Dobby had decided to make a mark, and show we weren't just anybody. So they roared out on the court and ran around in their capes, then took their capes off. And that didn't last very long, but that was Dobby's introduction. And I say this basically to say that the only reason we got to play Seattle and Iowa and many of the Utah teams was because of Dobby. And in my third year, the year that we played Baylor, we knocked about 3 teams out of the top 20.
Mm.
And, of course, that was our best year, 18-8 record. And we actually should have beaten, our record should have been maybe 10 losses instead of 18. But, so, anything more you want along those lines?
Well, I'm just so interested. So what was the transition like, Mr. Kelly, going from Romney to the field house back in those days?
A little louder.
What was the transition like going from Romney Gym to the field house?
Well, because of the seating up there, you know, they had bleacher-like seats. They were not regular seats, but there's like only 5 rows, and they circled the gym except for the hole to go down to the second floor and the hole to enter from the front. So it was very, let's say, comfortable in the sense that you were with the fans.
Mm.
And they were with you. The unfortunate part was you were all claustrophobic and vision was cramped. There was a second floor that had a ring of seats or 2 up, actually the 4th floor, the second floor of the gym, and a track to run around the top so you could run laps up there during non-playing times.
Oh, okay.
So anyhow, it was great to be with the fans. So when the field house was built, you can imagine, oh my God, the biggest stadium west of the Mississippi River. And that unobstructed view, and the ceiling was so high you couldn't even throw a basketball up there. And the floor, of course, was over dirt. Originally, it was a portable floor that stood about 2.5 feet to 3 feet above the dirt. So when you were on the bench, which was on the floor level, you had to jump up onto the floor. And Dobby had a routine whereby if he got some bad calls from the ref, he had to jump up on the floor with both feet planted, with his sports coat draped down over his shoulder and around both arms as if he was being handcuffed, and he wore Florsheim, God, what was the style of those shoes? Wingtip Florsheims.
Mm.
So when his feet went down on the floor, there was this huge crash, and then him gesticulating that the damn referees had tied his arms behind his back and get off it. So, and by this time, he had gotten an assistant, Bob Rousey, who was from Indiana but played for Kansas and was an All-American mention or All-American there at guard. So Rousey was our assistant coach, and Dobby was our cheerleader, and his energy, if you never saw it, was absolutely incredible. That guy could wake up the whole stadium, and so I can't think of
that. That's okay. Take me through those Seattle games. You bring up Elgin Baylor, and it was 2 days ago was the anniversary of his passing, but it was also the anniversary of him being named most valuable player of the NCAA tournament. You played against him that year, is that right? When they lost in the championship?
You say it again, please.
When did you play against Elgin Baylor? What year was that? The year that they won the championship or lost the championship?
Yes, the same year.
Okay.
That was the last year he played. He was in his junior year. We played him first out in Seattle, and we didn't know what we were getting into. And so they were coming back from Hawaii, I think, a Christmas tournament, and they had just scorched everybody over there. And we didn't know what to expect. And so we got a lesson. And I saw out there some of his magic as if I were an onlooker, because Cheney was supposed to be guarding him. Larry Cheney was our best player, Mr. C. And Mr. C was supposed to guard him, and we were supposed to help. Well, our help was like, stand there and watch. Now watch this. The first time I was up against him in defense, I was back, and we had a fast break. And the last person back on the fast break was supposed to stop around the center of the court in case they got the ball and came back at us. So Baylor got a hold of the ball, and I'm back there, and I'm backing up, and he's just slowly waltzing up the floor. If you think of Michael Jordan or those guys, they're so fast, quick. My God, Baylor wasn't. He was just ambling up the floor. So I thought. So we were close by the time we got near the basket, and I thought to myself, "I'm bringing you down. You're going to pay the damn price for scoring all these points." And so, I ducked under him as if to knock his feet out from under him. And at that time, I'm looking down at the floor, and I think, "Oh, Jim, you've done it." But I don't see him on the floor because I'm looking the other way, having turned, and I see the ball go out of bounds. So I think, great. So I run over and get the ball and throw it back in. I didn't learn till later, while he was on my back, he'd reached over and slammed it.
Oh!
I didn't even know it. The other thing I noted was Cheney went up with him on defense. And I had already learned that most people, in trying to anticipate what they're going to do, once they've left their feet and going up, they're going to let the ball go before it reaches its height. That is, on the downside, they don't do much of anything. Now, things have changed since those days, but that's how the rest of us were. Well, Cheney had him blocked, and on his downward motion, Baylor shifted his body to slant away from Cheney, stick out his left arm, and just before hitting the floor, let it go with his left hand and it went in.
Oh.
And, you know, the guy was absolutely incredible. So when he came to Bozeman, I was told to guard him, and the rest would play a four-man zone and help me out. And so playing center, as you all know, is you're in a position, at least in the old game, where somebody played a center and two guards and two forwards. You saw patterns developing. You were in a position to see patterns unlike anybody else on the team. So if something was going to my left, a bunch of action going to my left, I immediately started to open up for what's going to come from my right. And so I had at that time played against a number in my junior year, enough of supposedly all-American guys in Utah. And I know, and some guy from St. Regis, I think it was called. Anyhow, he was a real scorer. And I think we played him in Bozeman. Anyhow, can't really remember, but all of those guys were the kind who would say, I'm getting mine, I don't care a damn about you. So if they got the ball, the other four guys could maybe just hang it up. That guy was going to do something until he shot it. So there was often, instead of 5-on-5, there was often 9-on-1. And it was the exact opposite with Baylor. He helped hit his own teammates when they could most easily score. And they knew he was playing with them as much as for himself, that he wasn't out to score a bunch of points every night. And furthermore, because at that time, I was getting very good at anticipating what people would do, especially the center that I was playing against. And down in Utah, I blocked all sorts of shots. And somebody, when I got home, I think it was Roland Rennie, the president, who listened to it on the radio, he said, "My God, you're becoming a Bill Russell for blocking shots." So anyhow, in blocking shots and watching Baylor, knowing that it wasn't 9-on-1, I would look for any hint I could about when he's going to pass off. And I am telling you, it was impossible. That is, he would, let's say, start to dribble away from me and do it long enough that, well, he can't be throwing it back over his shoulder. He would just do that same thing and hit the guy underneath. Wow. And they had one guy, Sweet Charlie. Anyhow, as at halftime, we were even with them. By the near end of the game, we were still even with them. I had blocked a number of Baylor shots. My classmate got a picture of me in one. And with 1 minute and 45 seconds to go, we were 6 points ahead. And we could have easily kept them at bay. But I'll be damned if they didn't knock it down to 2 points. And not Baylor, but other guys. So anyhow, in the last little bit, we took the ball out, and it went to Jimmy Wallace, our guard, who got trapped on the sideline. And I was just a little bit away, the closest one to him, and his back was towards me, of course, because he was stuck on the side looking out at the audience. And I yelled, and he didn't hear me. So they got the ball back. And in those days, you got the ball back, and you really had quite a bit of time compared to what they have now. But they scored and beat us in the last little bit.
Mm.
But it wasn't Baylor who did it. It was a guy called Jim Harney and Sweet Charlie Brown. That was the guy that I thought it might be. Anyhow, the other thing to say is that during the times that I played against Baylor, I don't think he and I ever spoke a word together.
Oh.
I don't know that I even recognize his voice. You know, and a lot of players, you badmouth each other, or you say various things. And not with Baylor. It was all quiet. And when he went pro, I'll add one other thing. In his first year as a pro, and by this time we had television, we could see them. When the other team would full court press Minneapolis, where he played, his four teammates would clear the court. They would just turn and run to the other end after throwing the ball out to Baylor. And Baylor would start to dribble slowly, just like he did with me. And he would go through all of them. And they just left it that way. And I think in his first year, I don't know, he scored in the 70s, 60s. I think it was high score. Anyhow, I have always liked playing against the best. And I love playing against the best, even if it's like the time I got to be second unit photography camera on Peter O'Toole.
Mm.
O'Toole, that is, we happened to hit it off when I first met him. He came up to me because I had a turquoise ring on, and he came up and he says, "Geez, that's a nice ring. Where'd you get that?" This is his first day on the set, and I'm just waiting for setup for the next setup, and I said, "Well, I got it here and I got it there," and I said, "Say, I just wanted to let you know that I had no idea I'd be here today. You know, they just hired me to do second." And I said, "But last week I saw a film of yours just by chance." And I said, "It never got much good reviews or this or that." And I said, "God, it was really good." And I said, "You know, I've been dealing with method actors.
Mm.
And method actors, as you know, they have to get into the psychological state, and then they do it as if they've forgotten who they are, and they're great at pretending." Well, coming from England, they don't follow the method actor business. And O'Toole was an exquisite technician, kind of like Baylor was in his way. So I said, "My God," I said, "you know, in that film, you even made your knees eloquent." And he really liked that.
Oh.
And he could see that I was on his side. And so I will tell you that most people, whether I'm doing first camera or second, even with somebody's experienced as Rita Moreno, when I have my frame set and we're ready to go, they don't ever ask me, "Well, where are you?" That is, they wanted to know the edge of the frame. They do not want to know the edge of the frame on their body. They just do the master and all the repeats, and close up and so forth with whatever the camera's doing. They do it identically, but they didn't know the exact frame of the camera. Well, the first thing O'Toole does with me, he turns to me, they're about ready to go, and he asks me, where's the frame? So I give him with my hands, I show the frame above his head and just below his chin or chest, whatever. So anyhow, from that point on, he always asked me, where am I? And the reason he was doing that was when you think of a close-up being cut with the master, say, taken with a wide-angle lens that shows like 5 people doing whatever they're doing, and then you use a close-up lens to get the close-up, well, that close-up fills the screen, which can be like 50 or 60 feet wide. So it ain't like the shot in the medium shot. And most of the time, people don't pay that much attention. But O'Toole was such a master that he did. Now, he'd just come from Ireland and had been drinking heavily. Probably why he signed up for this Canadian film. And let's see, who else was in it? Dave Hemmings, remember Blow Up? Dave Hemmings was one of the leads, Donald Pleasance. Anyhow, O'Toole signed up for it and was going through. And the thing is, once he came on the set, he was all there. He may have been drinking all night long and skinny as a rail, but man, he was there. And turned to me, okay, where's it at? So I'm now shooting him, and then my camera is supposed to go over and get a Canadian actor who's in the background when O'Toole exits to my right, or camera right. Now, in the scene, he's a general from a foreign enemy army, and he has a cigarette holder, and he walks around behind my camera. He walks over to the left side, halfway up toward the other actor, and he walks over to the exact edge of my frame, because who's on camera keeps their eyes open. You want to know when somebody's getting close and try and prevent it if you can, so you don't have to retake the damn thing. So he comes right to the edge and blows smoke into the scene. And I just about passed out. Oh, that is a real actor. And that is a real perfectionist. He knew within inches, even where the frame was out there in space. So, I just break out with admiration. And I've been against so many, with so many important, like Dave Hemmings, the British actor, played in Blow Up, which was huge. And he was knighted, and he helped me do second unit. That is, when I needed help with my assistant, Dave would pick up cables and instruments, and we'd carry them. And when we had to go take the Jeep or go someplace else to get shot from far away, he'd jump in the car with us. And the assistant I had at the time was, he had just graduated from Ryerson, my film school, and his name was Rory. We always call him Rory the Ripper because in the student films, they always wanted him when there was a problem, then on would come Rory, and Rory would have a knife and he would deal with it. So Rory the Ripper.
That's funny.
So anyhow, Rory, whose family was from England, living in Toronto, became friends with Dave. And the next thing I know, when the shoot is over, Rory is invited back to England with Dave. And Dave had to be in the country only so many days out of the year for tax purposes. So Rory got to meet all the hoi polloi over there, filmmakers and, fancy people. And he was, Dave was using Marlene Dietrich. And so, I learned this later. So Dave had to leave the country. So who else to leave it? Rory took over direction. He ended up directing Marlene Dietrich. Anyhow, that's the kind of amazing, fun things that would happen to us. You got enough?
Yeah, I think I think that's some good stuff. It's interesting to hear all the great older stories of Bobcat athletics, for sure. I mean, you were there, Mr. Kelly.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to say it again.
You were in Montana State when they won the 1956 championship in football, and Sonny Holland watched you play against Seattle. You had some great times at Montana State.
That's right. I happened to be president of the M Club, so even though I wasn't a football guy, I knew all the athletes, and at one point we all lived in Hamilton Hall. And Sonny and I were buddies, and I always called him my Butte Rat. And the Butte Rat, and this was before, the football team had done anything much. Anyhow, I couldn't believe it when I was back there teaching. He was now famous. And as a player and then as a wonderful coach.
Yep.
So, yeah, when he said it, I said, well, goddamn right, it was the best. And I said, I should have a statue in front of the field house like you got, over wherever it is. So anyhow, yep. Sonny, who rarely exaggerated about anything, that game was so exciting, and I can not tell you how loud it was with bleachers now at both ends. Oftentimes there weren't bleachers at both ends of the floor. They'd put in the extra bleachers because they knew everybody was coming to see Baylor. So that place was as packed as it could be, and they won, and it was absolute silence. And, oh, Christ. I went home but I remember, I have played from coast to coast. That is city ball, intramural ball, you name it, college ball. I had played from Seattle to Washington, D.C., from Kentucky and Florida back to L.A., and I can't remember a damn game except one with Baylor and the other one when we beat Iowa State at the last minute.
Oh, man.
So, and I can't remember Baylor's name. Regret not even having talked to him, really. So I have wonderful memories, and playing basketball was the only sport that I liked. I never played anything else. Score in Helena tried to get me to run the 440 in track. You know, Sheriff, he did everything. Through the discus, the javelin, this and that. And I think Ray Howard did a number of stuff I can't remember. Both those centers went to Missoula, as you know, and I ended up playing for Bozeman against both of them. So I am glad I got to play at least once against Ray Howard, who is the sweetest guy, and I think one of the absolute wonderful people in basketball.
Hey, before I let you go, tell me real quick about, because you brought up Kentucky. Tell me about your roommate, Buck Gosted from Belfry. He was offered a full ride by Adolph Rupp. Is that right?
Yeah, let me, if you want, I'd be glad to tell you about Buck. Let me put it this way: for a couple of years, there were the four of us. That is, the two guards, Al Harris and Jack Tilley, and me and Big Ted Carter. Then the fifth person was often interchangeable. There would be Jimmy Wallace. There would be Bob Ogren, who played on the Helena team, still lives in Bozeman, had a business, retired. And then there was Buck Gosted, who led the Belfry Bats to 3 state championships. And the thing to tell you about Buck, or Philly Buck, was that he was 6 foot tall and had legs that were incredibly powerful. And when any of the other number 5 people got on the court, you know, we just got on the court. When Buck got on the court, within minutes, there was almost smoke coming up under his shoes. He actually burned rubber starting and stopping. And the crowd often started chanting during a game, "We want Buck! We want Buck! Where's Buck?" So he would come onto the court and just tear it up, but he was always 6th man. And he and I roomed together, and I would say, you know, he'd say, "Shit." I'd say, "If you're doing anything, slow down." He says, "God, if I slow down, I'll be 8th or 9th. I said, "No, the mistakes that are being made are because of the rest of us. We can't keep up with you." He says, "Oh, bullshit. Come on. I don't dare slow down." So in my 3rd year with Buck, we came together late at night in the bedroom. He says, "Well, I guess I never told you, Adolph Rupp, the Kentucky coach and the most famous in the United States, offered me a full ride." I said, "What? You didn't take it?" He says, "Oh, no." He says, "I wasn't good enough." I said, "He's the best coach in the United States." And he says, "You are good enough." And Buck says, "No, no, no." And there was something, I don't know, in Buck, and maybe it was because he came from Belfry or something, but some kind of sense of insecurity about his talent. And I will add the final thing, that he was he held the high jump record for a number of years at 6'6". I mean, he was 6 feet, but the record was 6 feet over his head, and he was not skinny. He was more like a fullback, or in other words, he was a sturdy build guy, and yet the most powerful legs going. And people just couldn't believe when he came on the court. And nobody ever did a chant for me or Big Ted. So, yeah, I'm glad to be able to get that in about Buck.
Well, Mr. Kelly.
He's still alive, as far as I know, living in California.
Oh, okay.
He has a daughter from his wife, Big Nance, who's from Livingston, was from Livingston. Family owned a restaurant there. And they had a daughter who I think lives in Bozeman.
Oh, okay.
With their own children.
Well, it has been...
Big Ted, of course, has died. And I really liked him.
It has been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. I have really enjoyed this.
Say it again?
It's been a pleasure to talk with you. I have had so much fun learning.
Well, I am so glad to pass this along because, as you know, I believe, like Paul Wiley, in history. And the film I made of my grandparents, that hour film that Geraldine liked and their mother, that was made from the bottom up history and not top down history, not by professionals who don't really get it, who have some ideology. And Paul Wiley's books are just a testament to how much he has created in terms of Montana history. And of course, his latest book, which I happen to already get, thank goodness, and the binding and the paper materials are unexpectedly beautiful.
Yeah.
Just holding that book is wonderful. Anyhow, yep. And I say that radio, I think, is going to make a comeback. I think the bullshit being put out by so many TV stations is such that if you follow the truth at all, you can't believe any of them.
Yeah.
And, or not many of them. Or if you do, you're going to get fooled. And I think radio will be coming back, just like when film came in. Television was supposed to come in and knock out film. Well, television came in and didn't knock out film. And then television went out in a way, not really, but with the internet and all these smartphones and Twitters and so forth will knock out that. No, it's just not true. So we can't go back and have a basketball game in which there were no slam dunks or fancy moves like there are today, but those old games where you didn't have to shoot right away and you could stall for the rest of the game if you wanted without penalty. So anyhow, I like basketball the way it was played, and I kind of get tired even during March break when I'm watching all the games, and there'll be a Gonzaga game on at 7 o'clock tonight, our time. So, yep, I thank you and what you're doing. I hope you're going to be financially okay and can use my input for promoting not me, but Helena history. So thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Walker.
Thank you very, very much. Take care of yourself.
Will do.
All right. Thank
Bye
you.
for now.
Bye.